Bonjour tout le monde. Bienvenue. Yes, it is true that I majored in French more than 40 years ago. So I ask that you bear with me. I don't teach French. So I do have a list of all the courses I took, and yes, I know it's kind of small. You can't see them all, but that's the Sir Christopher Wren building at William and Mary. It was mostly literature courses, 17th century lit, 18th century lit, 19th century lit. It's been a while. And then I worked for a while, and then I went to Middlebury College. This is at their campus in Vermont, where they actually have a building called the Chateau, where their French studies is housed. I spent 7 weeks in intensive immersion there. They even arranged it so that when we went to eat in the dining hall, we were being served by our fellow French students, and we had to ask for our food in French. We were only allowed to speak English if we went into town or dealt with the administration, who could not be polyglots for all the languages that Middlebury teaches. And I very foolishly failed to take any photos of the 3 different campuses in Paris where I studied, and I wish I had, because they were something to see, let me tell you. I just want you to bear in mind what I did my thesis on. It was not on a literary topic. I had been working in ocean freighting for 3 years, and so that was my passion, and the professors at Middlebury were totally nonplussed that I didn't want to write a thesis about literature. And so the French administration had to go back to the Vermont administration and get special permission for me to write a very boring thesis about the French maritime industry. It was already outdated by the time I got it typed and finished, but there you have it. So I just want you to bear in mind my expertise is in French shipping from 40 years ago, and not so much on the literature. But I don't know what you know about the city of Paris, but it's divided up into 14 administrative districts called arrondissements, and it's arranged sort of like a snail shell, starting in the middle and spiraling outward. Most of the tourist areas are in the heart of that snail shell. I was in the 14th arrondissement, so I was kind of off the beaten path. I had this little studio apartment 2 blocks away from the Montparnasse Cemetery, but it was a great location. There was no elevator, sans ascenseur, but I was a lot younger then. I still had my original knees, so I was able to climb those stairs with ease. My kitchen was quite simple. It was like a kitchenette. It was a sink and a little mini fridge under the counter and 2-burner stove. There was no oven, there was no microwave. I didn't even have a toaster. So I didn't do a lot of cooking there. It also had what the French called, at least at that time, a WC à la turque, which means a Turkish toilet. And Middlebury kept tabs on all these different places that had rented to students in the past. And I remember their description had said for this particular apartment, mieux convenable à un garçon, probably better suited for a boy. And that made me so mad. It's like, I'm taking that apartment. I'm going to show them. So let me show you what it looked like. You see this thing right over here? That was not only my toilet, that was my shower drain. When I needed to take a shower, first of all, I had to climb up almost 2 feet to get into my little bathroom. I had a wooden pallet that I would lay on top of that and then stand on that and scrub, and if I dropped the soap, it went down the toilet. So it was very simple, but I managed it. I remember when I'd go into these little divey cafes that had not been updated since the war, and I'd say, où sont les toilettes? Where's the toilet? And the owner would kind of look at me, it's in the back. And kind of smirk and thinking, oh, this American woman, what's she going to do when she sees the Turkish toilet? And I'd just go back there, just like at home. No big deal. I wasn't going to let that faze me. But even though I was a not quite starving grad student, I did have a wonderful time studying in France. So let me get to what I actually need to talk about today. And again, tiny print because there's so much French literature, and you guys know I can't possibly cover it all today. I may not mention your favorites. I'm going to go with the ones that I feel comfortable talking about, some writers that I studied in depth, some that I wish I'd studied, and I've got one American writer that I want to introduce to you whose insights on French culture I greatly respect. So I highlighted the names of the ones I'm going to hit, and after I present each one, I'm going to go through 10 of them. I'm also going to have a quotation from each one of them, translated into English for your convenience. All right, so let's get started with Jean de La Fontaine. I've arranged them in chronological order by day of their birth. All right, La Fontaine was a poet best known for his fables. These little moral lessons were largely adapted from Aesop and other cultures and retold in poetic form. The poems cleverly depict human nature and behavior through anthropomorphized animals, offering gentle satire and moral lessons relevant to society. La Fontaine's versions of these stories are the source of several proverbs that are still popular in modern French culture. I'll share a few of these with you. Il ne faut jamais vendre la peau de l'ours que l'on ne l'ait mis par terre. Don't sell the bear's skin before you kill the bear, which I guess is, don't count your chickens before they hatch. La raison du plus fort est toujours la meilleure. Might is always right. Petit poisson deviendra grand. The little fish will grow big, which I think is their version of what Deputy Barney Fife used to say to Sheriff Andy Taylor back in Mayberry. You gotta nip it in the bud. All right? Little fish will grow big. Un tien vaut, se dit-on, mieux que deux tu l'auras. One, you have it, is worth two, you're gonna get it. It's like bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. À l'œuvre, on connaît l'artisan. A workman is known by his works. Rien ne pèse tant qu'un secret. Le porter loin est difficile aux dames. Et je sais même ce se fait, bon nombre d'hommes qui sont femmes. There's nothing heavier than a secret. Women can't carry one very far. And I know this fact as well. There are a good number of men who are women. On ne peut trop louer trois sortes de personnes, les dieux, sa maîtresse, et son roi. There are three types of persons that you can't overly praise: the gods, your mistress, and your king. Les ouvrages les plus courts sont toujours les meilleurs. The shortest works are always the best. And here's a quote from La Fontaine. All the brains in the world are powerless against the sort of stupidity that is in fashion. Okay, let's move on to Molière, Jean-Baptiste Poquelin. Lily Shayna, who's the host of this website with the improbable name of French Possum, claims that it is said that English is the language of Shakespeare and that French is the language of Molière. A major French playwright, Molière was also a poet. He is considered the greatest, or at least one of the greatest, French dramatists and the father of modern French comedy. According to Helen Shaw, who's a drama critic at The New Yorker, and I'm quoting her here, New York theater has chosen its person of the year, Molière, and that was as of December of last year. Molière depicts all levels of 17th century French society, providing good-humored and intelligent mockery of human vices, vanities, and follies. In her December 2025 review of the most recent production of Tartuffe on Broadway, Shaw captures the essence of Moliere's work so well that I'm going to quote her here at length. If it's the year of Moliere, then it must also be the year of the liar, the hypocrite, the poseur, the clown. In many of his comedies, as in Tartuffe, a man at the head of a family exaggerates some seeming virtue, respect for doctors, piety, to a fanatical degree, threatening the happiness and fortunes of everyone who depends on him. These obstinate paterfamilias types, particularly the narcissists who think that they're strong-minded pillars of society, are exactly the kind of flattery-prone suckers who make easy prey for charlatans, quacks, tutors, lay religious counselors on the make. Moliere, writing at the pleasure of Louis XIV, was a court-approved playwright who had both a popular audience and aristocratic patrons. And so, although he often mocked rich men as gullible fools, he never suggested removing them from power. Instead, it seems, idiots with sway must be placated, educated, accommodated, and worked around. All right, that was all Helen Shaw, not me. All right, in addition to Tartuffe, or The Imposter, which saw 2 Broadway productions in 2025, one with Matthew Broderick in the title role, Moliere's major works include Le Bourgeois Gentilhomme, The Middle-Class Gentleman, which was also on Broadway in 2025 under the anglicized title of Prosperous Fools. L'École des Femmes, The School for Wives, L'Avare, The Miser, in which we learn that il faut manger pour vivre et non pas vivre pour manger. You've got to eat to live and not live to eat. And of course, the duty of comedy is to correct men by amusing them. On to Voltaire, François-Marie Arouet. A writer, philosopher, and historian, Voltaire helped introduce Enlightenment thought, Sir Isaac Newton, John Locke, to France. According to the Voltaire Foundation for Enlightenment Studies at the University of Oxford, this is a quote from them, it has been estimated that in a career which stretched over 60 years, Voltaire's extant writings ran to some 15 million words and covered just about every topic and genre conceivable in his day. He wrote in a wide range of literary genres: verse, satire, drama, histories, and essays. Gillian Pink, an academic editor of The Complete Works of Voltaire, has said, quote, "In Voltaire's day, I think he was first and foremost seen as a poet, as a playwright. Now we think more of his battles for justice." Another academic editor of that collection, Alison Oliver, adds that Voltaire was, quote, "an innovative thinker who used literature as a way of bringing about change and making a difference." Voltaire used as many as 175 different pseudonyms during his career, partly because so many of his ideas were controversial at the time. He's also considered one of the great stylists of French language due to his ironic, fast-moving, deceptively simple style. He loved to act in his own plays, Mahomet, Zaire, Socrate. His many works include his Dictionnaire philosophique, which criticizes the Roman Catholic Church, Judaism, Islam, and other institutions. One of his best-known works, still widely read today, is his novella Candide ou l'Optimisme. In this story, a young man named Candide lives a sheltered life, being indoctrinated with an overly optimistic philosophy by his mentor, Professor Pangloss. His comfortable lifestyle ends abruptly, and Candide gradually becomes disillusioned with the world as he witnesses other people coping with great hardships, some of which he experiences himself. The story ends with Candide, and thus Voltaire, declaring that we must cultivate our garden, thus demonstrating that he no longer shares Professor Pangloss's belief that all is for the best in this best of all possible worlds. Now, there are various interpretations of this concluding advice. Voltaire was an avid gardener himself, and he felt that time spent tending flowers and other plants kept him productive and distracted from the world's many flaws. Another perspective is that cultivating one's garden is a metaphor for minding one's own business, or even withdrawing from society to spend time in meaningful reflection. It could also suggest that we should focus only on life's most basic necessities, providing for our fundamental needs and keeping entertained but away from mischief. I'll let Javier Darcos, who is the chancellor of the Voltaire Institute and a member of the Académie Française, have the last word here. Voltaire has a very special place in the French collective memory, a completely preeminent position in French culture. Voltaire represents the spirit of France in all its modernity. The most unhappy of all states is that of a man who has nothing to do. On to Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Now, technically, Rousseau was born and grew up in what is now Switzerland, but he moved to France in his 20s. He was a contemporary of Voltaire, a writer, philosopher, and a composer. In fact, at one point, when Rousseau faced an arrest warrant because some of his writing had offended the Swiss authorities, Voltaire offered to take him in, but Rousseau didn't accept that invitation. The remains of these two beloved authors and philosophers are buried close to each other in the Panthéon in Paris. Rousseau had a wide range of interests and work experiences, including music, for which he developed a unique but impractical system of notation. He also wrote the libretto and music to an opera, Le Devin du Village, the village soothsayer. Rousseau was involved in several unconventional romantic relationships. One of the greatest regrets of his life was his decision to have his bastard children turned over to a foundling hospital where he hoped they would receive a decent upbringing and education. This decision somewhat undermined Rousseau's credibility later in life when he tried to establish himself as an authority on early education and child rearing. His major works include the following: Du contrat social ou principe du droit politique, on the social contract or principles of political right, which argues that people are generally born good but become corrupted by society. One of Rousseau's most famous declarations comes from this work: man is born free but is everywhere in chains. Rousseau believed that people should surrender their individual desires for what's best for the general will of society. Julie, ou La Nouvelle Héloïse, Julie or the New Heloise, is a sentimental novel, and according to some sources, may have been the best-selling novel of the 18th century. Amid a story with some possibly autobiographical elements, the novel suggests that one should conform to society's expectations only to the point that those expectations coincide with one's own feelings and principles. The Catholic Church felt that this philosophy directly conflicted with its authority, so Rousseau found his novel listed on the Index Librorum Prohibitorum, which is a list of works that were considered heretical or in conflict with the moral principles of Catholicism, which meant that Catholics were prohibited from reading it. According to Wikipedia, the novel made a strong impression on Napoleon in his youth, and after dinner, he would often read either it or the Bible aloud to guests while he was a prisoner on St. Helena. But the work I want to focus on from Rousseau is Émile ou de l'Éducation, which is a treatise about the individual in society. Here's its famous opening sentence. Everything is good as it leaves the hands of the author of things. Everything degenerates in the hands of man. In a nutshell, Émile traces the maturation of a boy by that name from childhood through adolescence to early adulthood. In telling Émile's story, the book conveys Rousseau's views on the ideal upbringing of children using some methods that resemble today's Montessori methods. Rousseau encourages mothers to breastfeed their infants rather than hire a wet nurse, give them a large cradle in which to move around freely, and dress them in loose clothing for the same reasons. Rousseau also believed that parents should neither beat nor shout at their children. During the next stage of childhood, parents should refrain from sending their children to a school to be educated among other children. Instead, they should hire a private tutor who would foster the development of the children's senses by guiding them as they play outdoors, observe the natural world, conduct experiments to draw their own conclusions, and thus form solid judgment rather than learning solely from books. The book further suggests that all children should learn a manual trade according to their natural inclinations and talents, which will teach them the value of hard work, keeping them out of mischief, and preparing them for possible future misfortune. The parents and the tutor should allow the children to gravitate towards their own interests, history, art, language, or whatever they choose. Finally, once children reach adolescence, they need to have their reasoning abilities counterbalanced with greater sensitivity to the feelings of others and their own emotions. At this stage, children are finally ready for exposure to spiritual values and for greater interaction with general society. Theoretically, such an upbringing would create adults who can resist temptation, think for themselves, and appreciate the finer things in life. In Rousseau's illustrative story, Émile has now become the ideal man, strong and active, ready to meet and marry Sophie, the ideal woman, weak and passive, whose sole purpose is to please, advise, and console her husband upon whom she completely depends. Public response to this book's publication during Rousseau's lifetime was largely negative. The church and the state issued a warrant for his arrest, and other readers called him a hypocrite because of how Rousseau had treated his own children. Why should we build our happiness on the opinion of others when we can find it in our own hearts? All right, Amantine, Lucille, Aurore, Tupin de Franqueuil. No wonder she changed it to George Sand. Aurore Dupin, better known by her pen name, George Sand, was a novelist, memoirist, and journalist. She composed more than 50 volumes of works, including tales, plays, and political texts, plus 70 novels. An advocate for women's rights, Sand criticized the institution of marriage and fought against the prejudices of a conservative society. She was considered scandalous because of her turbulent love life, her adoption of masculine clothing, and her masculine pseudonym. Married at age 18, Aurore soon realized that she and her 27-year-old husband had virtually no common interests, and 5 years into their unhappy marriage, Aurore had the first of numerous affairs, most notably with composer Frédéric Chopin. By my count, Sand became a mistress to at least 7 different men over the course of her life. Eventually, after 14 years of a sham marriage, she became legally separated from her husband. Sand scandalized many of her fellow Frenchmen by wearing men's clothes and smoking in public, causing some contemporaries to believe she was a lesbian. Among her best-known works is the novel Indiana, Sand's first effort at writing fiction, which brought immediate fame to its 27-year-old author when it was first published in the banner year of 1831. Yeah. Indiana tells the story of a young Creole woman born in what is now called Réunion, which is an island in the southwestern Indian Ocean east of Madagascar that is considered a part of France. 19-year-old Indiana is unhappily married to a much older man who tightly controls his wife's life and feels intensely jealous of any men in their small social circle. A shallow, selfish young aristocrat named Raymond de la Ramière becomes infatuated at first sight with Indiana and spends much of the novel trying to seduce her. While her cousin, Rudolph Brown, also known as Sir Ralph, looks on with a detachment that belies his own romantic interest in Indiana. In her preface to the 1832 edition, Sand refers to herself in the third person as he, perhaps because she felt that French society was not ready to believe that a woman could be a successful novelist with a story worth telling. Also, G. Sand was the pen name under which she published Indiana. It was the first time she used that name. Of the novel's theme, she writes, "He," meaning herself, the author, "has shown you the misery of the person who wants to free himself from legitimate restraint," that is marriage, "the utter distress of the heart that rebels against its destiny's decrees." If you read a high-quality translation of this nearly 200-year-old story, for example, the one by Sylvia Raphael, her 1994 version for the Oxford World's Classics, you'll find that it's easy and engrossing to read. The plot moves quickly with the minimum of intrusion from the author to slow down the sequence of events. Other works by Sand include the romantic novels Valentine, Lélia, and La Mare au Diable. Sand was buried in the cemetery of Nohant, which is a small commune located in central France. For the past 20 years, there's been some discussion about moving her remains to the Panthéon so that she can take her place among France's other great artists and public figures. And that proposal may be resolved at some time during this very year. You may impose silence upon me, but you cannot prevent me from thinking. Guy de Maupassant is considered to be a master of the short story and inspired several later authors, including O. Henry, with his economic writing style and clever plot twists. His themes tend towards those of the naturalist school, which takes a bleak view of man's lot in life. The characters in Maupassant's stories struggle against social or natural forces and rarely emerge triumphant from that struggle. His first published story, Boule de Suif, The Dumpling, 1880, is often considered his most famous work. Some sources have suggested that in a roundabout way, elements of this story may have influenced the plot of the 1939 film Stagecoach. Go figure. Right? Maupassant worked first as a clerk for the French Navy and later as a newspaper editor, writing stories in his spare time. He also socialized with other great Frenchmen of letters, Gustave Flaubert, Émile Zola, and Alexandre Dumas fils. His stories and novels were well received by the general public, and his keen business sense, along with a dedicated work ethic, helped Maupassant prosper as an author. He was not a fan of the new Eiffel Tower, it is said. He used to eat lunch often at the restaurant beneath the tower because that was one of the few places in Paris where he did not have to look at the tower's offensive architecture. He was buried in the Montparnasse Cemetery, a short distance from my apartment in Paris. His epitaph can be translated as, "I have coveted everything and taken pleasure in nothing." You can see Maupassant's possible influence on the works of O. Henry in another well-known story, The Necklace, which you may have encountered in a literature anthology. Here's the plot in a nutshell. Mathilde Loisel, an attractive woman who is dissatisfied with her middle-class life, finds herself invited to a grand ball. But she's not happy because she has nothing to wear. In an effort to make Mathilde happy, her husband sacrifices the money that he's been saving to buy a hunting rifle and uses it instead to buy her an expensive dress. But she's still unhappy because she doesn't have any jewelry to wear. Her husband suggests that she borrow a piece of jewelry from her more prosperous friend, Madame Forestier. This friend gladly lends Mathilde a diamond necklace, which she wears to the ball, but somehow loses. After searching everywhere for the lost jewels, Mathilde and her husband decide to buy an identical necklace and use it to replace the original without telling Madame Forestier the truth. They get away with this deceit, but they have to spend the next 10 years earning money to pay for those diamonds. Their work takes a heavy toll on Mathilde's health and good looks. One day, Mathilde meets Madame Forestier on the street and smugly tells her the truth about the substitute necklace, and finds out that not only was the original necklace made of cheap paste, but also that Madame Forestier had given away the expensive replacement to one of her maids. It's the lives we encounter that make life worth living. Marcel Proust, essayist, literary critic, and novelist best known for his masterpiece À la recherche du temps perdu, which used to be translated as Remembrance of Things Past, but more recently has been retitled more accurately in English as In Search of Lost Time. One source describes this book as officially the longest novel in the world, not only because it consists of 7 full-length volumes, but also because it has 1.2 million words in it, double those in War and Peace. Wow. Another source has observed that no one has ever read Proust and been employed at the same time. Many critics consider this novel to be one of the greatest literary works of the 20th century. This novel is not, however, an easy read, although several new translations have become available in recent years with different translators taking on each volume. If you're looking for plot or character development, you may be disappointed here. The protagonist of Proust's story is searching for the meaning of life. He wants to stop wasting time and to start appreciating his existence. Over time, 7 volumes of time, he explores 3 possible sources of life's meaning: social success, love, and art. After wasting his early adulthood hanging out among the wealthy and powerful social set, he comes to realize that people from all walks of life have both virtues and vices. As for love, it's pointless to believe that there's a perfect mate for us out there somewhere. Loneliness is the human condition, and no one can ever understand us completely. Therefore, the best way to appreciate life is through art. Like children who enjoy life because they have not yet become slaves of habit, artists help us find beauty in the most mundane aspects of daily life. Here's how one source sums up the novel's concluding idea. Early on in the novel, the narrator tells us that he'd been feeling depressed and sad for a long while when one day he had a cup of herbal tea and a madeleine, which is a soft vanilla-flavored cookie shaped like a seashell. hence the picture here. You can get pretty good ones at Walmart. And suddenly the taste carried him powerfully back, in the way that flavor sometimes can, to years in his childhood when, as a small boy, he spent his summers in his aunt's house in the French countryside. A stream of memories comes back to him and fills him with hope and gratitude. Thanks to the taste of this little cookie, Proust's narrator has what has since become known as a Proustian moment, a moment of sudden, involuntary, and intense remembering when the past promptly emerges unbidden from a smell, a taste, or a texture. Through its rich evocative power, what the Proustian moment teaches us is that life isn't necessarily dull and without excitement. It's just that one forgets to look at it in the right way. We forget what being alive, fully alive, actually feels like. The moment with the tea is pivotal in the novel because it demonstrates everything Proust wants to teach us about appreciating life with greater intensity. It helps his narrator to realize that it isn't his life which has been mediocre so much as the image of it he possessed in normal, that is, voluntary memory. That's why artists are so important. Their work is like one long Proustian moment. They remind us that life truly is beautiful, fascinating, and complex, and thereby they dispel our boredom and our ingratitude. Proust was sickly for most of his life, suffering from asthma, allergies, and other ailments to the point that some people considered him to be a hypochondriac. He is believed to have done much of his writing while lying in his bed. Living on a generous inheritance from his mother, he spent the final years of his life confined to his bedroom with cork-lined walls, which he believed would prevent pollen and dust from aggravating his breathing difficulties. This is a relatively optimistic. Always try to keep a patch of sky above your life. That's about as happy as Proust is going to get. Antoine-Marie Jean-Baptiste Roger Vicomte de Saint-Exupéry was his full name, but he's most commonly known simply as Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. Although he was an aviator by profession, he was also a journalist, a poet, and a writer in general. He was born into an aristocratic family, but when Antoine was only 4 years old, his father suddenly died, leaving the boy, his 4 siblings, and his mother in genteel poverty. As a young man, Saint-Exupéry had some difficulty finding his place in life. He failed to get into France's Naval Academy. He studied architecture but failed to earn a degree. And he worked at various clerical jobs until his military service during World War I gave him the opportunity to train as a pilot. Even as a pilot, however, Saint-Exupéry survived multiple crashes, except for the one over Corsica in 1944. The debris from that wreckage wasn't discovered until 2000, but the exact cause of the crash remains unknown. According to Wikipedia, yes, I do cite Wikipedia, some of it can be legitimate, Saint-Exupéry became one of the pioneers of international postal flight in the days when aircraft had few instruments. Later, he complained that those who flew the more advanced aircraft had become more like accountants than pilots. His flights took him not only all over Europe, but across Northern Africa and South America. At some points in his career as a military pilot, his loyalty to France came into question, yet he was ultimately awarded 2 of that country's highest honors, the Légion d'honneur and the Croix de Guerre. Before France adopted the euro as its currency, Saint-Exupéry's picture appeared on the 50-franc banknote and on a 100-franc commemorative coin. Because he was born in Lyon, that city renamed both its airport and its TGV train station after Saint-Exupéry. In addition to several international museum displays about Saint-Exupéry, his name was given to other airports, a number of schools and streets, and even aircraft. His face has appeared on postage stamps in other countries as well. Perhaps the oddest form of recognition is an asteroid that was named after him. Asteroid 2578 Saint-Exupéry, discovered in November 1975 by a Russian astronomer. Another asteroid was named in honor of his most famous and beloved fictional character, the Little Prince, who lived on asteroid B612. As if that weren't enough, there is an organization dedicated to protecting planet Earth from asteroids, the B612 Foundation, which was also named as a tribute to the Little Prince. Saint-Exupéry's experiences as an aviator inspired him to write about his adventures, both military and civilian. His major works include his memoir, Wind, Sand, and Stars, the novel Night Flight, and of course, The Little Prince, which virtually every student who makes it past introductory French class has read. If we can trust Wikipedia on this, The Little Prince became Saint-Exupéry's most successful work, selling an estimated 140 million copies worldwide, which makes it one of the best-selling books in history. By November 2024, the book had been translated into 600 different languages and dialects worldwide. It became the second most translated work ever published, trailing only the Bible. Less than 100 pages long, this novella tells the story of a 6-year-old boy who meets a pilot whose plane has crashed in an unidentified desert. Their conversations take place in simple language, making it easy for students of intermediate French to read the book in its original French edition. Although the book's content makes it suitable for young readers, older readers will discover that behind its elementary diction are some mature contemplations about human nature, love, and the contrasts between the perspectives of children and adults. Almost as beloved as the characters and their story are the simple cartoon-like drawings made by the author himself. In fact, the story opens with the narrator's amusing explanation of his limited skills as an artist. Because Saint-Exupéry's remains were never discovered, his body does not lie among those of the other great French authors in the Panthéon in Paris. There is, however, a plaque there that demonstrates France's great esteem for him. All grown-ups were once children, but only a few of them remember it. Simone de Beauvoir. Beauvoir wrote both fiction and nonfiction, including travel journals and memoirs. She was nominated 3 times for the Nobel Prize in Literature. Although she never received that particular prize, she did receive the Prix Goncourt, which is the most prestigious literary recognition in France. As a young woman, Beauvoir was a gifted student, excelling in mathematics, literature, and philosophy. While studying for the agrégation, which is a major postgraduate examination, she met and befriended Jean-Paul Sartre. Her score on that year's exam, and we're talking 1929, was second only to Sartre's. Shortly thereafter, the two became lovers in an enduring but open relationship that lasted until Sartre's death 51 years later. Beauvoir decided never to marry, and she never had children, at least not conventionally. At age 72, Beauvoir adopted a younger woman named Sylvie Le Bon, whom she'd known for a number of years. Throughout her life, Beauvoir's love affairs occasionally bordered on the scandalous, even by today's standards. Beauvoir taught for more than a decade until she began earning enough income to support herself with her published writing. In addition to The Second Sex, her most respected works include multiple volumes of memoir and autobiography, short fiction and novels, and philosophical essays, especially on existentialism. You didn't think you were going to get out of here without hearing about existentialism, did you? Indeed, Beauvoir and Sartre are considered major figures in that school of thought, which essentially ponders our search for meaning in a seemingly meaningless existence. Together with Sartre and Maurice Merleau-Ponty, a fellow philosopher, Beauvoir co-founded the monthly literary journal Les Temps Modernes, Modern Times. The journal's founding belief was that literature had a higher calling than merely to serve as art for art's sake. The editors sought to promote what they called littérature engagée, literature that is engaged with and therefore useful to life. For a literary magazine, the journal certainly paid great attention to political events around the world, often presented with what many people perceived as a communist viewpoint. Launched in 1945, the periodical reached its peak of popularity in the 1960s when it attracted more than 20,000 subscribers, and it ran for 74 years, ceasing publication just a few years ago in 2019. Although Beauvoir said and did many controversial things in her life, her most famous words come from The Second Sex. On ne naît pas femme, on le devient. One is not born a woman, one becomes one. Like Maupassant and Sartre, Beauvoir now rests in the Montparnasse Cemetery. This has always been a man's world, and none of the reasons that have been offered an explanation have seemed adequate. I'll wrap up with my only non-Frenchman here, Adam Gopnik. He's an American citizen who spent his formative years in Montreal, Quebec. And this year, 2026, marks his 40th anniversary of contributing articles and essays to The New Yorker, where he is an esteemed staff writer. Gopnik earned a bachelor's degree in art history at McGill University and earned additional credentials in that field at the Institute of Fine Arts, a part of New York University. In 1995, The New Yorker invited Gopnik to become the magazine's Paris correspondent. He took his wife and 2 small children with him to Paris and spent the next 5 years researching, composing, and publishing lengthy essays about various aspects of modern French culture. Those essays were eventually published in Gopnik's collection titled Paris to the Moon, which came out in 2000. According to the biographical sketch on Gopnik's professional website, he still often writes from Paris for The New Yorker, has edited the anthology Americans in Paris for the Library of America, and has written a number of introductions to new editions of works by Maupassant, Balzac, Proust, Victor Hugo, and Alain Fournier. Paris to the Moon is not Gopnik's only book-length publication about modern France. His 2004 anthology titled Americans in Paris is a collection of short nonfiction works about France written by Americans ranging from Thomas Jefferson to Harriet Beecher Stowe to A.J. Liebling, who was one of Gopnik's predecessors at The New Yorker. In 2012, Gopnik published The Table Comes First, Family, France, and the Meaning of Food, which his website describes as a beguiling tour of the morals and manners of our present food mania in search of eating's deeper truths. The humor, heart, and intelligence of Gopnik's writing have earned him the National Magazine Award for Essays and for Criticism 3 times. The French newspaper Le Monde has described Gopnik as a witty and Voltairean commentator on French life. France itself honored Gopnik in 2013 as a Chevalier of the Order of Arts and Letters. The French believe that all errors are distant, someone else's fault. Americans believe there is no distance, no difference, and therefore that any troubles are simple misunderstandings consequent on your not yet having spoken English loudly enough. And there you have it, my best effort to present 10 great French or Francophile writers in under an hour. Again, I'm certainly no expert on any of these wordsmiths, but if you have any questions now, I'll do my best to answer them. I just ask that you remember, the ship. Thank you.